Welcome to World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and in this two-part live stream, we're going to be talking about the idea of the New Age illusion, why the Golden Age never comes. And in this stream, we're going to be digging into the prevalence of a lot of ideas that we're on the cusp of, often a golden age. There are spiritual versions of this idea. For example, the age of Aquarius, of course. There are also religious versions of this idea. We have ideas like the rapture and the tribulation and the millennium, the 1,000-year rule of Christ, and all of these kinds of things. And then we have a secular version of this idea as well, which is very prevalent now. And I'm talking about the AI singularity, which supposedly is going to bring us a golden age, according to some. And then we also have the dark twin of these ideas, which is that we're on the cusp of the end. We're on the cusp of doom, essentially. I have some ideas about why these ideas are so prevalent at this stage in history. And obviously, these are astrological ideas. I'm going to be laying out this framework in this stream and hopefully serving you with some understanding of why these ideas are so common right now and in general over the last few hundred years of history. Now, I assure you that I'm not trying to rain on anyone's parade with this video. The purpose of this video is really to lay out where I'm at in terms of my thinking about some of this stuff. Some of these ideas are ideas that I've entertained myself, and I've probably put some of them out on my channel as well. So this isn't really about pointing fingers at anyone in particular. If anything, I'm also pointing fingers at myself because, again, I've entertained some of these ideas because they're so prevalent. They're all around us. They're very easy to soak up, especially if you are exposed to spiritual thinking, if you're in mystical circles or conspiratorial circles. These ideas are everywhere. And I think a lot of us entertain them. So, first of all, I want to show you a pattern. We're going to look at a few examples of things that are in the zeitgeist or have been recently. Now, of course, we have the age of Aquarius. This is the fifth dimension performing their song. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. This is the new age idea that we are on the cusp of some much more spiritual age, a much better age. And then we have more secular versions of this idea. This is the Russian Revolution of 1917. We have Lenin here. And this is the communist revolution, a complete shift in society meant to bring about a better world, depending on who you ask, through rejigging the system of a country. We've had many experiments of this kind over the past 100 years or so. And then we have some of these religious ideas. I have here a model of the so-called Third Temple, which some religious fundamentalists want to rebuild in Jerusalem. This is the Schofield Reference Bible, published in 1909, I think was the first edition, which is a version of the Bible which promotes a lot of these dispensationalist ideas, which include ideas like the rapture, like the idea that the Jews need to return to Israel before the apocalypse can come and Christ can return and all of that. This is Abu al-Baghdadi. This is the ISIS caliphate that was declared more than 10 years ago now. Another scheme of this kind, an attempt to create a theocracy and, in its own very dark way, a better world, a kind of utopian project, but again, not one that most of us would approve of. And then we have the singularity, of course, this tech idea that AI is about to get exponentially more intelligent, such that AIs are going to start essentially redesigning themselves and becoming more and more intelligent and are going to essentially become infinitely intelligent in a very short period of time. And because then we have this infinitely intelligent computer, this singularity, it will then solve all of our problems and completely change the world and bring us into a golden age, according to some, or everyone dies, which is the other side of that coin. This is Elisa Yudkowsky, aka Yud, who's a prominent advocate of the idea that AI is going to kill us all because we can't align it with human needs and it's going to decide it has more important things to do than keeping us alive. This is going back a few years, 26 years, something like that, to the millennium bug, which was supposed to bring about the end of the world or something like that in the year 2000 when all of our technology was going to fail. This is a Time magazine cover from that time. Needless to say, didn't happen. And then, of course, we have the 2012 event, the Mayan prophecy, supposedly the end of the Mayan calendar, or the beginning of a new cycle, which was trumpeted, a lot of fanfare, especially in New Age circles. Nothing happened, at least not on the surface of things. Of course, some people are still suggesting that maybe the changes did come, but under the surface. Here we have Extinction Rebellion, this protest movement essentially claiming that we are about to kill ourselves and everyone on Earth because of greenhouse gas emissions, and that we have to take very drastic action to stop this from happening, or we face doom. And of course, we have the threat of nuclear apocalypse, which is something that we've faced for quite some time now, since the 1940s, at least apparently, and particularly, of course, in the Cold War, when we spent decades supposedly on the brink of a global nuclear war. And things seem to be heating up in this area now. There's more and more talk of the potential for the use of nuclear weapons, whether that's in the Middle East, whether that's in Ukraine, and so forth. It seems that we always are on the verge of either the golden age or doom and then the golden age. All of these ideas, and they're very common, and these are real projects that we've seen in recent history. They seem to partake of, again, either the idea that a golden age is imminent, or that everything is about to end, doom, or that we have to go through a period of great destruction, but then the golden age will come. Why is it that these ideas are so prevalent? Why are we so obsessed with these ideas? Well, historically speaking, you might go back to this fellow on the left here. This is Zarathustra, or Zoroaster in the Greek version of his name, founder of the Zoroastrian religion, who was essentially the first person to posit a kind of linear time with a beginning, a middle, and then an end, which ends in a battle and a golden age. And that idea filtered through Judaism and then onto Christianity and Islam. Here we have the book of Revelation, where a lot of these ideas derive from. We're going to go more into this in part two of the stream. So we'll come back to this in part two, where we're going to go a bit deeper into some of the history of this stuff. But for me, what this stems from is what I'm calling the Gemini age. This relates to the cycle, the synodic cycle of Pluto and Neptune. If you count Pluto as a planet, which I do, at least astrologically speaking, then these are the two slowest moving planets in our planetary pantheon. So together, because they're the slowest moving, they produce the most powerful synodic cycle. And the slowest synodic cycle, which lasts 493 years. I've done a lot of work and research on this cycle, and I've started to see it as the master cycle. It's the kind of the deep layer of what's going on. All the faster moving cycles, the faster moving planets happen on top of this deep cycle, which is kind of giving us the base notes of history. Now, what I've done here, you can see two things on this page. So on the left, we have a chart which is showing the zodiacal location of every Pluto-Neptune conjunction going back to about 2560 BC. And the way these conjunctions work is that they gradually creep through the zodiac a few degrees at a time. So around 2560 BC, we had a conjunction in very early Aries. Then 500 years later, another conjunction about 10 degrees further into Aries. Then 500 years later, another conjunction, and so forth. So you can see how these conjunctions gradually creep through the zodiac a few degrees at a time. And what I think this does is it generates distinct ages, distinct chapters or epochs of history where we see different dynamics, particularly as it relates to the intersection between power and belief. Those who are truly in charge, who hold power in society, get to shape belief. These things are interlinked. And what you can see on this table here, so I have a table showing the year of each conjunction and which sign it was in. And you can see how from 1398, we entered what I'm calling the Gemini age. This is when conjunctions moved into the sign of Gemini, the sign of the twins, after 2,500 years in Taurus. This is a big shift around 1398. Soon after that, you see a lot of things happening, which I think smell very strongly of Gemini. Now, this is a subject I've been digging into in a Substack series called The Hermetic Age. So you can also read about this on my Substack, worldastrologyreport.substack.com. And I lay things out a lot more clearly and in depth in that series. One of the things that we see, though, as soon as we get into the Gemini age, is we see the emergence of modern international banking. This is a painting. I think it's called A Banker and His Wife Counting His Money. But from around that time, we start to see the growing power of banking and finance and the mercantile class, eventually the bourgeoisie. And we really see a transfer of power at this time, or at least the start of a gradual transfer of power from landowners and priests to these mercurial figures. Mercury, ruler of Gemini, aka Hermes, the planet we associate with exchange, with trade. Of course, we also associate Mercury with communication. He's the messenger of the gods. Very soon after those conjunctions in 1398, we get the invention of the Gutenberg printing press, about 1450, let's say, which essentially changes everything. It shifts Europe and later the rest of the world. I know some parts in East Asia, they'd actually invented versions of the press earlier than this. But this invention really does change the world. It essentially brings us into an information age. And that's what I conceive of this Gemini age or this Hermetic age in part to be an information age, an age of the word. But there's something else about Gemini. I've talked quite a bit about some of these themes already in videos, but what I'm going to talk about in this stream is something I haven't actually talked about before. It's something that I've been working out over the last few months, few weeks. I've had this in my head for a while and I've kind of been developing this idea and it's finally become ready for birth. Consider the four mutable signs. I've circled them here. So we have Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. These four signs are also known as double-bodied signs. There's a two-ness about these signs. And the reason for that is that they are conceived of in the tropical zodiac as constituting times when two seasons are happening at once, are overlapping. One season is changing into the next season. So these four signs, when the sun is in these signs, this is the end of a season each time. Now, because of that, each of these signs contains within it this kind of unspoken understanding that the end is coming. The end of the season is on its way. We're about to reach the solstices and equinoxes. These are very important moments in the year, especially as regards the changing relationship between darkness and light as the sun uh, completes its journey around the zodiac over the course of the year. The four mutable signs anticipate death and a new season. Gemini anticipates death and summer. So, what happens at the end of the month when the sun is in Gemini? Well, this is the summer solstice. This is the beginning of summer. This is the longest day of the year. So, when the sun is in Gemini in the month before that time, we're in the half of the year when light is dominating darkness. There's more, the days are longer than the nights. This is in the northern hemisphere. I'm going to do a bit of northern hemisphere prejudice here. I'm sorry, southern hemisphere friends, but these are the time. This is the time of year when the day is longer than the night, and the days are still getting longer in Gemini. But we know that the end of the season is coming. The end is coming. So Gemini is this exceptionally curious sign that wants to taste all that the world has to offer, particularly as it pertains to knowledge and information, wants to gather all of these possibilities, to learn everything there is to learn, to live 100 lives. And it feels like it can. There's time to, because this is the light phase of the year. Light is growing, and it's we're coming to summer. So Gemini has this kind of almost like unconscious understanding that summer is coming, and all it needs to do is try all these different ways of being and learn all these uh, different things that and gather information so that it can enjoy the summer to come. Now, if you look at twin and brother myths from around the world, you'll find that very frequently in so many of these myths, one of the brothers or one of the twins kills the other. So we have Castor and Pollux here, which are or have stars named for them in the actual constellation of Gemini, not the tropical sign of Gemini, but the constellation of Gemini. Castor and Pollux, one of them kills the other. We have Cain and Abel from the Bible here. Again, one of them kills the other. We have Set and Osiris from the Egyptian religion. We have Set killing, dismembering Osiris there. This is Romulus and Remus, the twins who, by legend, founded Rome. Romulus kills Remus and founds Rome. So there's this death that you see over and over again with these brother or twin related myths. There's a death coming at the end of Gemini. We have to choose one thing or the other. We can't keep expanding and trying more things and learning more languages or skills or whatever it is that Gemini likes to do. At some point, you have to choose. You have to choose this, but not that, this path, but not that one. Now, Here's my thesis. We talked about the Gemini age. We talked about the sign of Gemini. I think that the Gemini age, particularly periods when Pluto and Neptune are in aspect, is characterized by beliefs in the imminence of the golden age and or the end of the world. Sometimes it's the end of the world followed by the golden age. You may have heard this phrase, this famous phrase, immanentize the eschaton, or in this case, don't immanentize the eschaton, from this German American philosopher, Eric Vogelin. This was a well known phrase. I believe it was in the 60s. I think conservative students were bandying it around. But this idea of immanentizing the eschaton is exactly what this is talking about. It's talking about schemes to bring about the golden age. These are very common, particularly in the history of the West, but not only, and particularly over the past century or so. We've seen many of them, but not necessarily everywhere. I'm in Southeast Asia at the moment, and people don't tend to see the world this way. Although there have been these experiments even in this part of the world. But generally speaking, it's less a part of the sort of psycho-spiritual climate, the idea that we're on the verge of the end. There are some exceptions to this, of course, Cambodia, Pol Pot, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now let's talk about the planets as they are now. This is the famous Barbeau basket. Barbeau, of course, never called it the basket, but let's forget that for a moment. We have this remarkable configuration of the outer planets. We have a minor grand trine with Uranus here at 4 degrees Gemini, Neptune at 4 Aries, Pluto at 4 Aquarius. Jupiter is moving into an opposition with Pluto soon. It will be at 4 degrees of Leo. And this is, there's no doubt about it, pretty incredible astrology. The sort of the perfect aspects are something that you would see very rarely. In fact, you can't really find anything like this if you go back in history. So it is quite remarkable. But as I've said before, I consider the Pluto-Neptune sextile to be the deepest, sort of most powerful, probably even I would dare say the most important part of this configuration. And we've been talking about the Pluto-Neptune cycle. This is the Pluto-Neptune sextile over time. So this is a visualization of how close Pluto and Neptune have been to a sextile since chart starts roughly in the 1930s, 1940s, they start getting close to a sextile. And they've actually been in this aspect for something like 80 years now. Arguably, they stay in this aspect for about a century if you have a relatively wide orb. So this is an interesting thing, and the reason this happens is due to the eccentric shape of Pluto's orbit. So there are periods where essentially it starts moving around the zodiac at the same speed. It doesn't speed up, but from our perspective, it looks like it does, and it stays in the same aspect with Neptune for a very long time, for about a century. Now, generally speaking, people consider the sextile to be a weak aspect. It's a kind of aspect of opportunity. I'm not so sure how true that is when the sextile lasts a century. I would say that that turns this normally quite weak aspect into a very powerful one because it's acting over a very long period of time. So this is essentially a process. It's a process that began in the 1940s. You can think about some of the things that came into the world at that time. And you can, people will argue that our world really came into the world at that time. We had the end of the Second World War and then the sort of post-Cold War settlement, not the post-Cold War, the pre-Cold War settlement, the post-Second World War settlement is what I wanted to say there. with the foundation of the UN. We have the invention of the computer in the 1940s. We have the nuclear bomb. And essentially, the world map hasn't changed too much since that time. Now we're at the end of this process now. We're coming right to the end. Now, what happened during this period here? We had this earlier period where Pluto and Neptune were making exact sextiles between 1950 and 1956, and 1976 and 1986. And in between those two periods, they didn't really separate that much. So they were basically very close to this exact sextile for a long, long time, for about 40 years, a little bit more. What happened during that period? Well, this is the Cold War. This is almost perfectly the Cold War. If you take the Cold War from, say, 1947 to 1989, fall of the Berlin Wall, you have the span of the Cold War, and it fits this period perfectly when Pluto and Neptune were very close to this sextile. Now, I'm saying that one of the things that we get in this Gemini cycle is we get utopian schemes and the idea that the summer is about to arrive, and we also get imminent doom. And what did we have during the Cold War during this period? Well, we had imminent nuclear doom. We had utopian political projects. Think of the USSR, think of communist China, think of Cambodia, think of many other places. And we had proclamations of the Aquarian Age. We had the New Age movement during this period, where people were essentially saying, we're on the verge of this glorious spiritual age. Summer is coming. Other people are saying doom is coming. And other people are saying our communist system is going to create perfection. So there we have Lenin and Stalin, leaders of the Russian experiment. We have Mao here, launched the Chinese Communist Revolution. Here's Pol Pot, genocidal communist in Cambodia. And then, of course, we have the threat of nuclear Armageddon throughout this period. People believing that the world is on the verge of nuclear doom. We have the New Age movement. This is the harmonic convergence of 1987, which essentially derived from, I believe it was some calculations related to the Aztec calendar, if I'm not mistaken. But then there was this idea that if enough people meditated, and I believe the number was 144,000, which is straight out of the book of Revelation, if enough people meditated, they could create peace on earth. So this was an event that came with massive fanfare in 1987. Nothing happened, although the Berlin Wall did fall 2 years later. So who knows? But it didn't bring the golden age. Now, part 3 of this journey, 2026 to 2032, the period of the Pluto-Neptune sextile that we are in right now. We've kind of just sort of starting to get into the thick of this. You can see that this is this last period where Pluto and Neptune make exact sextiles. We saw what happened the last time they did this. What's going on now? So let's try and take the temperature of the world at the moment and some of the things people are saying. Elon Musk says saving for retirement is irrelevant because AI is going to create a world of abundance. It won't matter. In other words, this is a golden age prediction, which we've seen many of before. Now, you may, like me, have seen a lot of stuff like this on YouTube or other parts of the internet, very new agey videos, claims that the Pleiadians say that the shift is here, the shift supposedly being some intervention by aliens, which is going to make our world, amazing and more spiritual. It's basically all this, it's these kind of new age ideas that we've seen for a long time. We have another version of this idea involving UFOs and aliens, but a much darker one. I don't know if any of you have read this book, Final Events by Nick Redfern. It's a very interesting book, essentially covering what are called the Collins elite. Here's Ross Coulthart, UFO journalist, I think I can call him, asking who are the Collins elite. They're supposedly a elite in the US military who believe that aliens are demons and that by essentially announcing their presence, we would bring about the end of the world. So a darker version, but basically the same story. We have this doomsday clock, which has existed for quite a long time, supposedly showing how close we are to midnight and annihilation. I think this thing is a bit silly, to be honest, but apparently now it's 89 seconds to midnight. So we're very close to doom, the doomsday clock. It's the nature of the times. Vladimir Putin has a big decision to make on Crimea, and some analysts say he could go nuclear. Some people are worrying that the conflict in Ukraine is going to go nuclear. Now, I'm not saying it can't, but it's interesting, isn't it, that we're getting back into this Pluto Neptune sextile phase, just like the Cold War, and once again, this threat of nuclear annihilation is back in the news. And then, of course, we have the red heifer, a perfect red heifer, which supposedly needs to be slaughtered and burned to create holy water, which can be doused on priests who are going to build the third temple. This is a news story I found. There's lots of them talking about these red heifers, and people are trying to breed them. And there are some religious fundamentalists who are genuinely into this stuff, both Christian and Jewish, who want to rebuild the temple for their own reasons, to bring the Messiah, or to bring Jesus back, bring about the 1,000-year millennium, etc., the rapture, and all of that. A lot of people believe this, and we're hearing more and more about it. And then, of course, we have the whole idea of the climate emergency. This is a story I picked out. Overshoot, the world is hitting point of no return on climate. We've been hearing these kind of doomsday narratives for quite a long time as well. And this is Chris Bledsoe, the famous UFO experiencer, who I've covered a bit on the channel before, who has said that there are people in power scripting the book of Revelations to bring about Armageddon and the end of the world. So, some tentative predictions. In 2026 to 2035. Notice I didn't say 2032, because what I've seen with these aspects is that things can happen a bit when Pluto and Neptune are separating as well. And a good example of this is the French Revolution 1789, which is about 3 years after 1786, which was the last time Pluto and Neptune made the exact waning trine, which is another century-long aspect, but we won't go into that right now, although we will in part 2. So in 2026 to 2035, or about then, expect the steep rise in apocalyptic thinking, claims that the end of the world is imminent or has arrived, nuclear threats and brinkmanship, claims of imminent total technological or systems failure, utopian and totalitarian political projects, proclamations of a golden age. This is what I'm going to be expecting, I think, over this period. You might have gathered, though, that I think this is the condition of the age. I don't think these things are actually going to happen. I want to quote now from a book called LSD and the Mind of the Universe by Christopher Beisch. I love this book. I just want to say, very interesting book. Religious studies professor Christopher Beisch took massive doses of LSD on a regular basis for many years, massive heroic doses, and essentially did this deep work of exploring spiritual realms. This wasn't for fun. This was to try and understand the true nature of, well, the mind of the universe, as the title says. So I'm not highlighting this book to pick on it because I genuinely really like the book and I recommend that you check it out if that sounds interesting to you. But I'm going to quote from it because what Beige says here is very typical of the summer or summer and or doom themes that I've been talking about here. The core vision of our future that has emerged in my sessions is that humanity is coming into a time of great awakening, a profound shift in the fundamental condition of the human psyche. But for there to be a great awakening, there must first take place a great death. We must be emptied of the old before the new can emerge. I have come to believe that the 21st century will be such a time. It will begin the dark night of our collective soul, a time of emptying, of intense anguish, of loss of control and breakdown, a global purification unto death that will last generations. But through this hard labor, we will give birth to something extraordinary, more than just a new civilization. What is emerging is nothing less than a new order of human being. I believe that through the global systems crisis, our planet is giving birth to the future human. Okay, so we have doom and then summer there. It's very clear. This is something that Beish has saw in his sessions. And again, not to pick on him, and of course, anybody can be right, anybody can be wrong. I can certainly be wrong, but where I'm at and where I'm leaning towards is that this is probably not what's going to happen. I think the condition of the age is to feel that this is what's going to happen, and that catalyzes rapid change, rapid learning. Think of Gemini, but I don't think there's this kind of great revelations like tribulation and then millennium is coming based on my studies. But if such visions are false, why do so many people perceive them? So there are many people like Beish who perceive that this is where we're at. There are many people who come up with utopian visions for how society can be better. There are many such schemes that are enacted. Many people have very clear visions that we need to do X and Y in order to make a wonderful world. And they're also given literal visions, spiritual visions, psychedelic visions, you name it. So if these aren't real, if this isn't where what's actually happening or what's going to happen, why do we keep perceiving them? Again, I think this is the psycho spiritual undercurrent of the Gemini age, and it's essentially a fuel. They are fuel for the psycho spiritual engine of the age. So we need this kind of undercurrent of belief that this is what's coming. This is what drives change and rapid, say, invention and things of this kind. It kind of pushes society, just as Gemini's subconscious kind of understanding that the end and summer are coming forces Gemini to be this, or leads Gemini to be this very curious, kind of young, endlessly fascinated with learning and the world kind of sign. If you scale that up to a civilizational level, I say that's what we are. And these people who are having these visions are kind of seeing this in very vivid terms. But it's, again, the fuel that drives the engine. I don't think that this is what's going to happen. What I'm not saying, by the way, is that everything's fine, that nothing bad is going to happen, that we aren't going to be in for some pretty turbulent years. On the contrary, I think we probably are. I think they're going to be pretty crazy and they might get kind of scary in places. But I don't think this is the end. And I don't also trust announcements of the golden age, which I think we're going to hear quite a few of. Now, you may find this a bit depressing. I don't know. Maybe you really do yearn for this golden age. And, it's a very common idea. It's maybe even a sacred cow in New Age circles, which is quite literally what the New Age is supposed to be about. The idea that a wonderful new spiritual age is about to dawn. Now, I do think that in certain respects, there is a current of spirituality which is growing. an interesting one, and one that will be powerful in the future. But I don't think we're there yet. But I don't know if it's healthy to constantly think that we are on the verge of a new age or the or the other one, doom. I don't think that's it's not a comfortable way to live. It's not good for your nerves. And I think that the framework that I've laid out here might help if you think about this. And I don't expect you to instantly agree with me. Um, this is just something that I've kind of come to realize, I think, relatively recently. So I don't expect everybody watching this to go, "Oh, yes, Dan, you're absolutely right." Um, but what I've found is uh, that I find this perspective quite grounding and relaxing. And that's not why I've come up with it, by the way. I've come up with it by studying the signs and the history. But I have found that sort of chilling out a little bit and thinking, okay, we're probably not on the verge of absolutely all changing change. I think things are changing very rapidly, but we're not facing doomed we're not looking down the barrel at doom. We're not also about to enter some wonderful kind of paradisical age. We have to get busy living, and I think the potential for disappointment with assuming that some grand golden age is coming is pretty high. And at some point, when the golden age doesn't come, and it frequently is predicted and doesn't come, there's countless examples through history. Then there's a bit of a come down for that. All right, so that's basically it for part one of this stream. Thank you for everybody who's joined me. I hope you've found this interesting. In part two, I am going to provide the receipts, as the phrase of du jour has it. I'm going to provide the historical receipts and show through history how certain activated times of these Gemini ages have brought about in the past these kind of utopian schemes, these ideas that the golden age is about to come, the millennium has arrived, and so on and so forth, or the other one, doom. I'm going to show you how that has happened, almost like clockwork in the past. So this is part two. We have a few more sections of this presentation to come. The birth of linear time, the medieval foreshadowing of modernity, the word, the wheel and the arrow, final thoughts, and then I'll take some questions. So if you want to join part two, I'm going to end the stream now, but I'm going to send out the link for part two to members of the website and members on YouTube at correspondent tier. And you can also go to the live streams page of my website, worldastrology.com/live streams, if you want to pay to join part two. We're going to go much deeper in part two, and I'll be starting that in about 10 minutes. So if you want to join, then sign up now. Otherwise, no worries at all. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have found this interesting. I am going to stop my share right now, and I am going to stop the stream and wish you a wonderful weekend.